I recently moved into a new apartment with my dog, Marbles. It's not a nice place by any means, but it's the only option I had. I'm just starting a new job, and I barely have enough money to cover rent, ramen, dog food, and a Netflix subscription. So I settled on this small, dirt cheap apartment on the outskirts of town, partly because it's cheap and partly because it's pet friendly. No, it isn't ideal, but it's only temporary while I save up some cash. The apartment is small with only 3 rooms. The first room you enter is the kitchen/living room with a hallway in the back. The door at the end of the hall leads to the bathroom. In the hallway is a door on the right side of the bedroom. I don't have any furnishings or personal belongings, so the apartment remained very bare. I never bothered to worry about sprucing the place up because it was just a temporary home. We had been in the apartment for a few weeks and everything had been fine. As we really settled into the place, Marbles took a liking to the couch in the living room. It wasn't my couch, it came with the apartment. Well, Marbles started sleeping on the couch at night. That said, Marbles likes to get up and relocate in the middle of the night. She would get up and come to the bedroom door and hope to get inside. I always sleep with the door closed, so she would start to whine and paw at the door. Marbles had long nails that she hated getting cut, so you could hear her walking throughout the apartment if you were awake, and it made her pawing pretty loud. After a few nights of this, I just started leaving the door open for her. From then on, she would come and get in the bed with me at all times of the night. This never bothered me. Many more weeks went by with nothing noteworthy happening. Well, one weekend, my Netflix binging session lasted much longer than usual, and I was still up at 2 in the morning. I was just wrapping up Stranger Things Season 2 when out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. In the doorway to the hall, there was something peeking at me. I turned to look directly at it. It looked like the top half of a face peeking from the left side of the doorway. The only thing I could see were 2 eyes, beady and black, staring at me. I was frozen, not sure if it was fear or shock stopping me from moving. I blinked. It was still there. After a few more seconds, I started panicking and yelled out, "Who are you? Get out!" For a few more seconds, it kept staring, and then slowly began to pull away and out of view. Once I could no longer see it, it took a few moments to regain control of my body. Once I had, I jumped up and slammed the door, locking it. Marbles, who had been laying on the bed with me, was now sitting up and alert. I called the police and told them that someone had broken into my apartment. After a while, I heard them knocking on the front door. Eventually, I mustered the courage to step out from the room and run to the front door. They investigated and the landlord was called. No one was found in the apartment, and when the police had arrived, the front door was still locked from when I got home. There were no signs of breaking and entering, but I insisted that I saw someone. The police did one more sweep of the apartment before leaving, telling me that there was nothing more they could do. The landlord, to whom I must give credit, swapped out the locks the next day, giving me all new keys. He told me that it was possible a previous tenant still had a set of keys to the room and had come in. The thought unnerved me, but the more I thought back on it, the less human the thing seemed to be. It took a few weeks and many sleepless nights to go back to normal, if you could call it that. I told myself that I could handle the stress, that we would only be here a little while longer. During that time, I also bought a baseball bat, which I now kept beside my bed. Now, I still kept the door to the bedroom open at night, but only slightly ajar so Marbles could slip in or out. I didn't feel comfortable seeing the doorway where that thing had been. One night, Marbles came in and hopped up on the bed like she usually does. She settled down and rested her head on my thigh, a common occurrence. I had been asleep, and never bothered to open my eyes. I started drifting back off to sleep when I heard a sound. It was a familiar sound of scratching on the floor. It was Marbles' nails on the floor as she walked. It came from the living room and was approaching the bedroom door. I was facing the side of the room with the door, and I opened my eyes. Marbles was there, pushing the door open and coming in. A chill ran up my spine. Slowly, I looked over and down at the bed. It was there. The thing was resting its head on my thigh, looking right into my eyes. For a second, I got a look at it. It had a humanoid form, but it was impossibly inhuman. Its face was horrific with those beady black eyes, long greasy black hair, and a mouth without lips. Its body was elongated, and it looked as though it was made up of only bones with skin wrapped tightly around them. Its face started to creep closer to mine, and I was finally able to move. I threw the blanket over the thing and jumped out of the bed, running to the front door. I could hear it scurrying behind me, along with Marbles running behind. When I got to the door, I turned to see both Marbles and the thing following. Marbles made it to the door first, and once she was out, I slammed the door closed. I heard and felt the thing slam against the door, scratching and banging against it. I could also hear its raspy breathing. Eventually, it all went quiet. My phone was still inside, but after a while, one of the neighbors opened the door after frantic knocking. They phoned the police for me. The police weren't as friendly this time, but I told them I trapped the person inside my apartment. After a long search of the entire apartment, the police found nothing. I couldn't believe it. They scolded me and told me that if I called for this again, I'd be arrested. I felt like I was going insane. Refusing to go back in alone, the landlord accompanied me while I packed up all my belongings. I wasn't staying here any longer. My parents had an extra room they offered me, and it was going to take a long time before I felt comfortable being alone again. I'm typing this all out from my parents' house, laying in the guest room. Well, a few paragraphs ago I noticed something. Over in the corner is a closet with folding doors. It's slightly open, and in the crack of the doors, I can see two beady black eyes staring right at me. I moved into my new apartment a few months ago, right towards the end of summer. This apartment is very typical: one bedroom, one bathroom, a kitchen which leads into a living room as well. This would be the first time living on my own, but I was confident. I knew when my rent was due, my budget for food, and all that stuff. I was sitting on my bed looking for jobs when I first heard it. I heard my door creak open and then close abruptly. As you could imagine, I was very confused, but a couple of searches throughout my apartment let me calm down. A few minutes later, it happened again, a slow creak and then a sudden slam as the door was shut. This time, I was more annoyed than scared. I went through my apartment one more time and found nothing. After a little thought, this was the explanation I came up with. The door to my bedroom has this broken latch, which is stuck as if someone was constantly holding it open, which means that my doorknob is useless, and I can push and pull my door open. As I tend to shut my door often, this means that my bedroom can get pretty hot and the air becomes pretty stale. This means that I have my window open almost 24/7. This means that my door opening and closing is a result of the draft that comes through the window. The wind will push the door then get cut off, letting the weight of the door push it closed. This began to happen so often that I didn't even bat an eye to it. A little while after I started my courses, I was up late studying for some of my first exams. It was particularly cold that night, so I went and closed my window. From my position on the bed, I didn't have an immediate sight line on the door, and I would have to lean in forward to get a good view on it. As I was reviewing the material that my professor had posted, I heard that all too familiar slow open and abrupt close. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and immediately I felt the sensation that I was being watched. I took a weary step towards the door and opened it, staring into the dark void that was my bathroom. I went through my entire apartment and no window was open. In other words, there was no way, no reason for that door to open like it normally did. There was no logical explanation. Unless... No, stuff like that isn't real. I went back to my bed and tried to get back on track with my work, but I couldn't think straight. All I could think of was somebody hiding somewhere in my apartment just watching me. I thought to myself that there was no way I was sleeping in my apartment tonight, so I called up a bunch of people from school or anybody in the area to see if anybody had any room for me to sleep. But alas, they had no room for me, as most of them already had 3 college students in a 2-bedroom apartment. Totally pissed off, I looked towards the direction of my room and shuddered. I ended up sleeping on the couch. Nothing happened for a few weeks, and I had almost forgotten about it if it weren't for the door almost constantly drifting open and then slamming over and over. One night at about 2 a.m., I shot awake suddenly. I had no nightmares, no bad dreams, nothing. I didn't even feel tired. I was dead awake. I had closed the window before I went to sleep because my apartment is right next to a train station and the noise was unbearable. I had sat there just listening in dead silence. The only noise was the blood pumping through my ears. When I finally lay down, I heard the door creak open. It didn't close. I leaned forwards to get a better view of the door, and I screamed. Looking back were two eyes equally bloodshot, as if this thing was just crying. Its pupils were as black as the darkness that had surrounded it. I sat there, paralyzed. I saw a hand, which looked like it was manifested from the darkness, resting on the door. The skin was wrinkled and hung loose from the bone. Its fingers were long and thin, and its nails were like daggers attached to the end of its fingers. It rhythmically tapped its fingers on the wood, still staring. Its eyes were upturned as if it were smiling at me, yet I did not see any mouth. I was beyond horrified. All I could do was watch as it waded into the room, moving awkwardly as if it had just grown these limbs and was just testing them out. He came to a stop at the foot of my bed. It looked as if this figure had been built from wire, elongated beyond proportion. I could see his ribs poking through his skin, begging to be freed from his rib cage. He was almost as tall as my room, easily being over 10 feet tall. He raised his impossibly thin arm and pointed at me. I heard one thing. Leave. I didn't have to be told twice. I bolted out of bed and ran past him towards my front door. It felt as though I ran for 100 meters. It felt like an eternity, that it was impossible to escape and I wasn't moving. But I reached the front door. I swiftly grabbed my keys and sprinted out. Before I left, I took one look back, and the figure seemed to be smiling, staring at me. Run away. I quickly moved out after that, only returning during the day to pack my shit and leave. I found another apartment that was a bit more expensive, but I was happy to pay whatever to get out of that place. A few months after, whilst I was working on an English essay, the news station that was on in the background caught my attention. Recently, a landlord at the redacted apartment buildings has been arrested for the murder of 6 tenants over the course of 3 years. His most recent victim, Sadie Redfield, was reported missing 2 months ago, and when Sadie's neighbors reported a foul stench coming from her apartment, room 163, 2 police officers showed up on the scene and found the landlord cuddling with Sadie's decapitated body. The news showed an image of the landlord and his name, and my blood ran cold as I recognized the man as my own landlord. Just then there was a knock on my door. I walked up to it, and on the doormat was a box. I looked left and right down the corridor and saw no one. That's weird. First of all, I didn't order anything. Second, there wasn't a delivery guy outside. And third of all, how did someone get away so fast without causing any noise? I picked up the box, and attached to it was a small post-it note. See you soon. I opened the box and screamed. Inside the box were a bunch of photos of me sleeping and laying on my bed, all taken from that creaking door.